Delano, I want you to react to Anton's connecting all of this to feminism, and that that is what is leading black people, the black community, whatever that is, astray.
Well, I definitely would agree in terms of the role that feminism has played in leading to our community's sort of decline. Certainly, I mean, we talk about that all the time, but first and foremost with respect to the family, right? How it connects to immigration, I'm not necessarily sure I follow all the threads that Anton was pulling on, but I respect his analysis. I think that
Hold
the
for 1
immigration.
second. Hold on. Put a pin there. 1 second. I'm sorry for cutting you off, but I think his argument is that this whole empathy and sympathy thing. Everybody, again, we just played a clip I think earlier today. Simone Biles saying something about empathy. Everything should start with empathy and blah. That's a feminine emotion. You can't do a society based on where the foundational principle is empathy. It's got to be order, obedience to God. It's not about empathy. And so I've seen it. I've seen it with women in my own life during Trump's first administration. Called me up, said, "You see what Trump's doing with the kids at the border? They're separate." And I'm like, hey, that's an edited clip. That's out of context, and get out of your emotions. Them kids can go on back across the border just like they mom and daddy can or whatever. But I think that's what he said. We're over flooded.
Well, why shouldn't they be separated from their
empathy?
family? Is what I'm trying to understand. Why should if I get arrested for doing something that I'm not supposed to do as an American citizen, I get separated from my family, I got to go to jail. What I'm trying to understand is what is it that he doesn't understand, or what is it that he don't agree with?
I'm not saying that I didn't agree. Again, it was the connection between feminism and immigration. And again, if the point is about empathy, then I certainly see that, several books, including Jason, Ali Beth Stuckey wrote a book on toxic empathy. And I do think that that's a big part of what drives, some of these debates where you have even elected officials who have more empathy and sympathy for the guy that they describe as the Maryland dad who got deported, I think, sent back to Venezuela, than they do the victims of crime who the Laken and Rileys, people who've been actually killed by people who are in this country illegally. So I think that's a big problem. I don't think it's just a feminism problem. I think largely in our country, many of these issues are politically coded. So people have empathy for the people that they agree with and people that they like. We saw this in 2020. If you were pro BLM, you were fine with the protests. Then people started to switch things around. Obviously, the public health authorities were saying protests are fine if you're protesting, systemic racism, but protests are not fine if you're protesting the lockdowns. So I think a lot of it is politically coded. But I'll say this, Jason, because you talked about you were pushing forward, the restaurant analogy. I don't think the discussion is as clear and precise as we are making it sound. Let me explain what I mean when I say that. There's a Supreme Court case right now. It's the Mahmoud case that has to deal with parental opt-outs in a school system in Montgomery County, Maryland, right? The school system wanted to push LGBT stuff on the parents, and the parents were saying, no, we want to be able to opt out of that. This went through district court, made its way to the Supreme Court, because the school system said, you can't opt out of it. We don't want to allow you. The people who are pushing the opt-out, right, who want to be able to take their kids out, are largely immigrants, some of them from Ethiopia, from the Middle East. The people on the other side, and I remember this because I remember when the protests a couple years back, who are pushing for the LGBT, indoctrination, were, at least from the protests, from what I saw, largely white liberals. And I bring that up because when people talk about assimilation in America today, I'm not talking about in 1940, I'm not talking about when the Irish and Italians came over and they took Anglicanized names and they went to public schools and everybody said the Pledge of Allegiance and the Star Spangled Banner. I'm talking about today. Almost all assimilation today moves first and second generation immigrants to the political left. That's the way that assimilation is working ideologically. So in some respects, the people who have been running the restaurant, right? Now they will run a restaurant in the neighborhood that they don't live in. They'll drive to this restaurant. They'll run this restaurant. They'll hang all of the banners and the flags that'll tell you what their politics are. Then they'll go back and go drive back to their safe neighborhood. But these are the people who are pushing many of the things that we fight against. And I think it's a sad commentary on the state of American culture, where when you see the second or even third generation Asian immigrant, Indian immigrant, when you hear their kids in high school and you see them with the septum ring and you see them doing the debates, at Ivy League colleges, they sound just like your standard issue progressive, whose great grandfather, is Boston Brahmin and been here since the 1600s. So it's to me, it's less about the demographic and more about the values, the principles. And I agree with you. Like I'm to the point now where it's like if I hear trap music playing in a particular venue, I'm turning around, especially if I'm with my wife and my kids. Like we've left restaurants where I walk in, I got reservations for brunch, and my wife was like, "Why did you pick this place? They got the little the fake grass on the thing with the neon lights and the DJ pumping." And I said, all right, let's go somewhere. Let's take the kids somewhere else.
But I mean, it's like you're walking away from the conversation because you're trying to appease women.
No,
and I don't know
Anton, you knew here.
I don't know if
you knew here. That's not how I get down. I'm sorry. I respect you. I respect your content.
I'm only going by what it is that I see you saying right now, and it's directly tied to feminism. Even an example that you used with regard to the Black Lives Matters movement, that was a group of Black women lesbians that then took advantage of a marketing opportunity in order to continue to push an agenda based off of what corporate America was trying to champion. And you can't tell me that these organizations aren't smart enough to be able to realize who's behind a certain movement and whether or not they want to support it. Directly tied to that, the civil rights movement itself was hijacked by feminism, which was then hijacked by the alphabet community movement, which they then tied everybody in. Why you're starting to see Black and brown. Birthright citizenship itself was never meant for everybody. It was meant for American descendants or African descendants of slaves, but now we're using it and leveraging it, and the ones that's promoting it the most is women. If you want to see where a movement is going, all you have to see is women. Women, Black women in the community is largely the ones that are controlling where the vote happens in the urban community, and they are the ones that are the most vocal on social media. So if you're telling me that it's not directly tied to feminism, and that this whole empathy movement, the whole support of illegal migrants inside of the United States of America, that they didn't hijack it, even when they was trying to market why we should vote for Kamala Harris during the last election and celebrated and talked more about my body, my choice, more about the things that wasn't relevant to the Black community. And when they finally started to communicate with Black men and ask them what they wanted them to change family court laws, which is directly tied to how it is that we're being impacted in single motherhoods, is raising men that ultimately aren't really a fabric of what it is that we want or the model of what we want men to be inside of our communities. If that's not all directly tied, if you're telling me that the separation of families, that they marketed certain people to be tied to the Democrat Party based off of the fact that they knew that separating families or removing fathers from the household, and that they didn't update family court laws, even though they were established at a time where women had less choice. If you're telling me that that's not directly tied to what it is that we're looking at politically or what it is that we see happening from an immigration perspective and who we supporting, then I would tell you that you're running away from the real issue, because if you want to solve for an issue, you got to get to the foundation of why we're here in the first place. It is directly tied to feminism. Everything is interconnected. And so I can't ignore it, because when I see people say I want a partner, not a husband, and they're making decisions on behalf of their family, then I know that that is the foundation. That is the culture. The culture is the thing that we celebrate the most in the community. It's not what we think it is. It's not our history. History and culture, a lot of times we get that mixed up. It all is interconnected. And when I see them marketing an opportunity, they're not marketing it to you, they're marketing it to your wife.
No, I think you misunderstand what I'm saying, right? And this is my comments have nothing to do with trying to appease anybody. What I'm saying is you reference a number of different political issues, and we could go through each one of them, and I'm not going to do that. And I could say, okay, if I want to give each one of them a score and to say, you know, which ones I think are most directly impacted by feminism, out of 100, I'd say, okay, the state of the black family, that's a 99. I may say a lower score for something else. If I really want to get at the root of the immigration problem, I think that this is largely a bipartisan issue. The left likes more illegal immigrants in the country because eventually they see that we're going to have more people to vote for us. The right is open to more illegal immigrants in the country because they think we're going to have a source of cheaper labor, which is why.
But when did that switch? When did it change?
I'm not sure when it changed, but it's been like that for decades now.
This wasn't an issue between Democrats and Republicans. If you go back and you look at footage from the mid to the early 90s, Democrats were saying the exact same thing as Trump. As a matter of fact, there's footage out there of Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi specifically saying literally word for word some of the same things that Trump is doing today.
Right. They were saying it. They were saying it, but they weren't legislating it. And we've
absolutely were legislating it.
We've had
advocates for closed borders.
We've had several presidents who have talked tough on immigration. But again, because one of the policy things that any president could choose to do, and Congress could certainly pass, is to say, look, we're not just going to enforce this at the border, which we should, right? Because if you don't have a border, you don't have a country. Just like if you don't have a front door to your house, you don't have a home. Mm-hmm. But we're also going to enact enforcement on employers. So if you employ people who are here illegally, you're going to get arrested. Your company is going to get fined. I mean, these are things that, again, politicians could do, but there's a reason that I think the problem has continued to metastasize over the years. And what I'm saying is this is largely a bipartisan problem. Now, if you want to make the argument that feminism encourages women to display empathy to people that they should not display empathy to, I would agree with you 100%. And that may speak to some of the people who take to the streets. What I'm saying is I don't necessarily see the thread or see that as the core of why over the course of the last couple of decades, you've had tens of millions of people enter the country illegally, and neither political party show a willingness to do anything about it. That's the point that I was making. Not a point about BLM.
But again, I think that you're off because, again, the reason why I asked you when it switched is because I believe that if you look at the Democrat Party today and you look at it of yesteryear, even from the boomer generation, again, it's a completely different party. The foundation, who it is that they market themselves to is the most important thing. They don't market themselves to men. They don't market themselves to people that ultimately make decisions that's in the best interest of the country. They market themselves to people that more or less align with a feminist or a feminism and their ideologies, which is the LGBTQ community, which is women that largely is taking a larger role in what happened from a political perspective. They are marketing more women in order to become a part of all of our legislative branches. You do see the rise of a Kamala Harris, which is being pushed on us, not something that we absolutely voted for. You did see the rise of Bill Clinton's wife. I don't even want to say her name because I don't really care for her that much. You see feminism taking over the liberal party, which is largely playing a role in how it is that we're operating from a societal perspective. So if you're saying that—
Let me jump in here for a quick second. Let me jump in for a quick second. And keep me, Delano, and Anton on screen if possible. But as Richard Steele, the referee, I just want to jump in and say that the reason why I lean to Anton's direction is I'm just stating a fundamental truth. Men settle differences, and it may be ugly, and someone may die in settling their differences. And it's unfortunate when it goes to that length. But when it's a group of men arguing, eventually it comes to a conclusion. Once you inject women, and people are less likely to be aggressive with women, kill women, settle something, because it's always a compromise, because a lot of times men are sitting there thinking, my sex life is riding on reaching a compromise decision with this woman. When it's a group of men and there's no sexual ramifications to settling things, things tend to get settled. I think what Anton is arguing, and it's certainly something I believe, you inject women into all this leadership stuff and they have a say, the fights never end, nothing gets settled. There is no, hey, I'm the head of this family and I know that you don't like this, but this is what we're doing. It's just an endless thing. And so what I think Anton is somewhat arguing, I don't want to put words in his mouth, is like, hey, back when women weren't really into politics, Democrats and Republicans actually used to have fights and settle things when it was just a group of men, because men sit there and just logically, and I look at, we are just overflowing with empathy to the point we can't, as black people, it's very difficult for us to say, hey man, George Floyd, he brought that on himself. If we dialed the clock back 50 years, everybody black would be. They had a saying back in Indianapolis when my mother and father were growing up about dogs and ninjas that chase cops end up dead, and that you go chase a cop car, you're gonna end up dead. And that's what I saw. When I look at George Floyd, I was like, man, this dude was chasing a cop car, and I'm not surprised he's dead, and I'm going to keep it moving. Instead, we all have all this empathy for George Floyd, and we all pretend like, that could be us. That could happen to me. And there's not one thing that happened to George Floyd that I ever thought could happen to me. I'm not going to be passing fake $20 bills. I'm not going to be high on fentanyl somewhere. Police tell me to get in the back of the car. I'm going to get in the back of the car and I'm going to drive. None of it could I relate to. But we all went around with this empathy, and some woman shot it on her cell phone, and everybody feels sorry for George. I don't feel sorry for Jacob Blake. I do feel sorry for Breonna Taylor because she had a simp for a boyfriend to let her get out of bed and go chase a cop car, and she wound up dead like a dog and some of these dumb ninjas that love to chase cop cars. Anyway, I'm going to let y'all go. Anton, if you can briefly, have I misrepresented what you said? Do it briefly and throw the microphone back to Delano so he can respond.
I don't think you misrepresenting what I'm saying. I'm just saying that at the foundation, if you want to solve for a problem, I just think that you got to get to the root cause of the issue. I think that we putting lipstick on a pig a lot of times, just only looking at it on the surface. And I think that the foundation of what's wrong with this country and the foundation of what's wrong with both parties a lot of times is that we pander to, we acquiesce to, and we do not truly get to the root cause of the issue, which I think that a lot of it is rooted in feminism and the fact that women now have the ability to choose for themselves. And the more freedom that they've had, the more often they've chosen wrong. And we decided to follow them as a country and as a nation.
Delano.
No, I mean, again, the general analysis, I don't disagree with. What I'm hesitant to do, Jason, is to fall into one of the left's traps, right? So if we were watching a panel of black progressives, whatever issue you could find in the black community, they're going to say, well, this is caused by racism. And they will give you sort of a long analysis, a historical analysis, and say, look, all these things was caused by racism. And the thing that we see today, so whether that's the breakdown in our families or poor school outcomes or poor health outcomes or gentrification or any other issue that they come up with, they're going to say this is caused by racism and white supremacy. And what I'm saying is, like, I'm hesitant to do that with any issue, you know, and to say this one thing is the cause of all these other things. Now, again, I can analyze it and say in certain instances, absolutely. In other instances, it's a little bit more of a stretch. So that's the only point that I was making on
like
this.
What? Give me an example.
An example of what specifically?
An example of why it would be a little bit more of a stretch or why it only slightly contributes to the issue.
As I said, like if we're talking about the state of the black family and the issue is feminism, I say absolutely. I say feminism deceive women into thinking that they don't need a husband, to thinking that the home is a prison, to thinking that marriage is a tool of oppression, to thinking that their children are a burden, and that they are better off submitting to their boss than they are to their husband. That's easy, right? 99% overlap. Again, if you're talking about why immigration has gotten out of control, and certainly since I'd say the 1980s, I'd say to attribute that directly to feminism, I think is more of a stretch, because
So
there
you wouldn't
are
attribute
specific.
it-
Hold on, Anton. There's specific policy issues that are at play there, and as I said, you're going to have a
Give an
problem
example of the
when
policy.
you're going to have a problem when both parties have an incentive to do something. And one party has an incentive to invite more people in because they think they're going to get votes. And another party has an incentive to invite people in because they think they're going to get cheaper labor. And when you have that type of bipartisan issue and bipartisan consensus, people will talk a good game on the surface, but you're going to have a problem that becomes entrenched. So I see that as, I see the failures of our leaders. And I think me, you, and Zeke all have kids. We're both all of us are dads. And I've used this analogy before, Jason, on the show. You know, my wife and I, we adopted her maternal cousin. When we told our kids that they're gonna get a new sister, they were happy. They were, oh yeah, we want a new sister. This is cool. This is great. If we told our kids, if we went back to our kids the next week and they said, okay, from here on out, from this week, for the next 3 years, every week we're going to adopt a new child. So after a couple of years, you're gonna have 1,500 new siblings. Eventually, they're gonna say, you know what? I don't know that we have enough resources to go around, and they are going to resent they're going to resent the new children, where they should really point their resentment at us, and particularly at me as their father, for mismanaging my household. And that's the point that I'm making about political leadership, right?
But here's the thing, though.
I understand.
Here's the thing, though. What about throwing into that powder keg the fact that you're incentivized to be a single mother because you can then latch on to the government as your father, and that's one of the reasons why we continue to see children having children out of wedlock, right? If you're not, because you'll say, for example, well, one party is incentivized to have more of these people over here, and so they can increase their voter base. And then on the other side, the other party is incentivized to go over here in order for us to have cheaper labor. Well, but one of the ways in which they're creating an environment where people are attached to the Democrat plantation for the rest of their life is the fact that all of us, most of us that grew up as Black people, were told that we vote Democrat regardless of whether or not we lived conservative lives. We could be raised in church, we could be told a certain thing, so on and so forth, but we were told that the Democrats were for the poor and Republicans are for the rich, when in reality, Republicans are for smaller government and to remove the barrier entries for you to be able to do it yourself, and Democrats are for basically tying you to the government in order to incentivize you to do something based off of how they control the narrative, right? And so we weren't taught that as children, but one of the ways in which we continue to stay in this cycle of poverty and this cycle that continues to keep us on the Democrat plantation, which then forces people to vote a certain way, even though it's not in their best interest. You could talk to people all day long, and I can ask Black people, hey, do you support illegal immigration into the country? No. Do you support men playing in women's sport? No. Do you support? Then why are you voting Democrat? And they say because we're supposed to, and because Democrats are for the poor, and we don't want the billionaire class to get all of the tax breaks, which is completely false. But how do they keep you in that narrative? How do they keep you thinking this way? They keep you that way because they don't incentivize strong families. They take care of you when you decide to have children out of wedlock. And if you tell them, hey, I don't know where my baby daddy is, you'll get an increase in food stamps, and you can then pass on Section 8 to the next generation, which basically keeps us in this cycle of poverty. So if you're telling me that feminism itself, which advocates for some of the very things that we are against as conservatives, and I don't know if you consider yourself adamantly a conservative or whatever, but if feminism itself is not falling in the very face of the thing that we advocate against in order to keep our families together, but they're incentivizing you to keep the federal government as your daddy, which then feeds into all of the other issues that they package. It's like a bad a bad investment, a bad ETF that they put all together and they say, hey, you got to vote for this based off of this, even though the majority of it is not in your interest, how can you say that it's not at the foundation, that the very thing that keeps us in this cycle of poverty, when our mindset and our cultural norms and the things that we celebrate the most is directly tied to the way that we vote, which then gives all of these people the battery in their back to advocate for something just because they don't like Donald Trump. They're going to go out there and protest and say, I'm rocking with them because I don't like him. Most of the people that voted against Trump, that voted for the Democrat Party, they voted against Trump, not for their best interest for what it is that they were marketing to him. It's directly, indirectly, and directly tied to feminism, which breaks our families down and keeps people in this circle of poverty, that then they get on TikTok and they market to the rest of the nation that this is what makes sense to us as Black people, or this is what makes sense to poor people. It's directly tied.
I'm gonna hop in here because we got to land the plane. But this is fantastic. It's been fantastic. I'm gonna make a final point, and just because Delano, Anton has talked more than you, and me and Anton together have definitely talked more than you, I will give you a little final say. But I do want to say this, and this is what I believe, and this is why I'm polarizing, and this is why a lot of people are afraid of me. If we removed women from political office, trust me, we'd have a border wall and we wouldn't be having any of these conversations about all these illegal immigrants coming into this country. There'd be a handful of men that would be, yeah, no, we should open the border. But a group of men with no women involved, we'd have a border wall and we wouldn't be having any of this madness. Men know, hey, look, man, just anybody just can't come up in here. And men know that now that we're sharing power with women, and they're all up in high, and they all get to vote, and they got high political office, we want to make sure we take the right positions so that these women respect us, and primarily, they've sexually leveraged us. This is why this is all tied to sexual compromise and sexual leverage. Women are using their vaginas to control us. I think these things are indisputable. And so virtually everything, and I'll go, Delano, this is where I do want you to respond just from a biblical point of view. When I hear Anton's argument, think about my own argument, I just go to Genesis and say, well, hold on, man. They told me that Eve did something in the garden and Adam wasn't around. Then he came around and then God was like, hey, man, what's going on here, Adam? How did you let this woman take you down this path? And so the Bible, to me, my understanding of it is like women's nature to disobey God and to get into mischief, and men being a simp and letting that woman drag them places they shouldn't be. That is the genesis of all problems. That's why I tend to side with Anton here, is just like us simping for women and women using their vagina as leverage over us has created a massive nightmare that we can't even tell people like, nah, man, we got a border. There's a legal process to getting into this country. You ain't following it. I just feel like we remove women from the whole deal. Everybody understands that. If we remove women from the whole deal, we wouldn't have Nancy Pelosi and Maxine Waters running around and pretending like George Floyd has just cleaned himself up and he was going to discover the cure for cancer. Didn't someone just this week, was it some woman or maybe it was some man, didn't someone just say, Donald Trump is deporting people? Maybe it was Michael Moore, who might as well be a woman. Donald Trump is deporting people that may cure cancer. But these MS-13 gang members are going to cure, get them up out of here. And if we get a few people who's the guy over in El Salvador that we made this big deal about? I don't even care if we were wrong for shipping him home. There's going to be some collateral damage in any cleanup process. I'm sorry. Delano, I'm going to take 2-3 minutes, give your final thought. Shamika, I'm going to give you a final thought too, because you've been waiting patiently. But just let's land the plane here, Delano, but I do want to give you a final thought.
No. I think, again, I broadly agree with both of y'all in terms of the corrosive nature of feminism. But again, if we're talking about immigration specifically, I'm not talking about the whole smorgasbord of political issues. We're talking about immigration specifically. One of the things, Jason, that if you talk to a lot of conservatives, the only times that they will criticize Ronald Reagan for two things. One he did while he was governor of California, one he did while he was president. When he was governor, he signed the first no-fault divorce bill, right? Which sort of was one of the first dominoes to drop as it relates to redefining marriage. So no longer sort of a lifelong union and covenant unless you had, good reason, abuse or adultery or something to that effect, right? So he signed no-fault divorce. That was in 1969. And then he signed an immigration amnesty bill in the mid-'80s. And a lot of people will say this is where this problem started, because it sent the message to people that if you come to this country illegally and you stay around long enough and you work and as Anton was saying, right, if you make people think that you're paying taxes, eventually we are going to grant you citizenship. And that's one of the things that you hear in this debate as well, right? So they'll say, okay, yeah, we got to seal the border, but then how are we going to deal with the people who are here already? So I think, again, I'm not downplaying the role of feminism in in many of the issues that we deal with as a culture and in our politics. And as I said, if you're talking about the family, anything having to do with sort of the home, the family unit, I think the case is a lot stronger there. But it's interesting to me that Hispanic men swung for Trump. I think it was probably a 10, 12-point swing between 2020 and 2024. Hispanic men, I think it was about over half of Hispanic men in this country who voted in the 2024 election. And these are obviously citizens, voted for Donald Trump. So it's not even to say that the left's rhetoric is particularly effective in that community. I think it's much more effective in our community for a number of reasons, some of them historical and some of them, again, having to do with this issue of particularly the intersectional feminism, right? It ain't, because for us, it's not Gloria Steinem and Betty Friedan that have caused the problems. Is Audre Lorde and Angela Davis and Alice Walker and Bell Hooks who have caused many of the problems that we see in the Black community. So, I mean, maybe we get to the point where women say, you know what, I'm no longer interested in politics, and we can see what the men do. But when I look on both the left and increasingly on the right, I see a lot of guys who don't show me that they have the spine to do what needs to be done. And maybe part of that is because they are trying to placate.
Women have removed their spines. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, women have removed their spine. We're having two different discussions
because
we're talking past each other. Yeah. I got to land the plane.
That's it.
We're talking past each other. You're talking left and right, conservative, liberal. I'm talking, I think Anton's talking men and women, patriarchy versus matriarchy. What's the real root cause? I don't think it's left, right. I think it's man, woman. I think it's patriarchy, matriarchy. Shamika, I'm going to let you land the plane here. You get a final thought. Thank you for waiting patiently. Anton, thank you. Great job as always. But Shamika, I'm going to cater and bow to Shamika just so I want to make sure Shamika likes me when this show's over. I'm going to be a simp. And so, Shamika, please, say something nice about me and land the plane. Thank you.
I just want to know if any of you need anything from the kitchen. That's all I have.
I like Miracle Whip on my sandwich. Thank you. I hope everybody enjoyed this. I certainly did. Like what you saw? Hit that like button, subscribe, and check out the full episode by clicking the link below.